You are a unique self, a holon, nestled in a whole bunch of circles, a holarchy, which exists within the wider superorganism of the earth that we call the Noosphere. If any of those words are new to you, we just did an entire series on this. So just go back 4 episodes and get yourself caught up, or just stick with us because today is going to be a recap, a put it all together an episode where we're going to talk about how all of these different things, from the Noosphere to the third story to Holons and the Holarchy, all come together to make one unitive path that we can take into the future. So join us as we discuss the path forward as we walk together down Creation's path. Hello, everyone. My name is Charlie, and I am a Christopagan druid and priest of Bridget.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian. I'm a Christopagan druid and sous chef to the dog dog.
And today, like I said in the beginning, we are going to be talking about the path forward. We're going to be taking everything that we've discussed this week, from the Noosphere to the Holon to Holarchy to the third story, and try to show you how it all kind of functions and works together to be really the path that we're taking forward to find a way, not just for us, but for everyone to escape the meaning crisis.
One might even say living in fractal kinship.
You can find out more about everything that we're doing over at fractalkinship.com, where we're going to be posting our thoughts about this through various pushes to get up there on the site. So just go over there, bookmark it, and check back often. There's a lot of stuff there and a lot more stuff that's going to be going up over there as time goes on. But before we get into all of this, if you haven't already, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, whatever the terminology happens to be, on whatever app you're listening to us on. We do 5 original Christopagan and Druid episodes, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss a thing because we've got a lot of fun stuff coming up. I know it's a spoiler, but next week is Divine Feminine Week, and that's going to be so much fun, and I can't wait for that. So let's just get into it now, shall we? All right. At the beginning of this episode, you are a holon who exists within a series of nested circles, or a holarchy, that exist within the larger, wider superorganism of the Noosphere, living and walking the path of the third story. This is the easiest thing to say, and I think, given our modern world, maybe the hardest thing to do, because we talk about how we can see the Noosphere by looking at the infrastructure and how things work together. We are living in a world of bypasses that move traffic away from many of our cities and towns, so that you have to go out of your way to visit a lot of them. So we have physically isolated a lot of parts of the country in that way. And we have siloed a lot of our content into various social media platforms, some of which have become overly toxic or even downright hostile to the people that are on them. We, for example, really only engage on Blue Sky, even though we do have an Instagram and a Threads account, but they have become such hostile places. And I mean that from the management perspective, to folk like us, that we really don't feel comfortable being over there. That sense of isolation that we're all feeling right now in a feature, not a bug. The whole point is for you to give up on trying to find the community that you're looking for and just accept the one that the various billionaires is running, and just dig in and be whatever version of a consumer they're trying to turn you into being. That is inherently unsatisfying. It's a big problem, both within the holarchic structure of society as it exists today, but it's also just a disease within the Noosphere itself that's preventing us from being able to really make those connections that we need to have with one another.
It's driving us to live in wrong relationship with our environment, with ourselves, with the nutrition we consume, the food we consume. We live in wrong relationship with it, often either consuming too much or too little, or the wrong types. We're driven through attraction and aversion to be so distracted that we don't even look at what is the responsibility of the things that we're interacting with. What is its responsibility versus what it is doing in practice. And So we
I
can't
think,
even function.
yeah, I think that really is a big part of the problem with everything that's going on right now, because the one part of this that I just keep getting fixated on, and it's not really something that I can do something about because it's not something that I have interest or expertise in, but I find it astounding that we live in a world where so many men have found themselves lonely and wanting to have some kind of a relationship, be it a temporary or a permanent one, with someone else. And entire industries have cropped up of people that are willing to give them the worst advice and shape them in some of the most hostile and dangerous ways so that they actually are incapable of forming those relationships, or so toxic to the people they want to have those relationships with that they keep going back to the very people that are giving them the bad advice, who of course have rigged up systems to explain to them, this is why it didn't work. And it's not your fault. And it's not, of course, the system's fault. So give me another $200 and I will explain to you how to get past those things that are blocking you now. And it's this constant money printing machine that is designed from the top down to ensure the misery and loneliness of the people within it. And it's not just those specific grifts. You can see this arising through the way religion works now, is designed to isolate and break people apart and prevent them from actually having relationships with each other, and to live in constant suspicion of each other, so that we have to keep giving money to the church so that it will tell us what we are doing wrong so that we can have the things that we want, while actually teaching us the things that are causing the divisions and causing us to have this separation and isolation that's preventing us from having those divisions.
It's literally through perversion or replacement of first and second stories. And then, of course, also keeping everyone ignorant the concept of even a third story.
Actually, I disagree. No, I disagree. They're all creating pseudo versions of the third story. That's why they're able to survive. Because if you listen to all of these,
you're thinking it's not that they're replacing the first and second, that they're actually creating these weird,
yes,
artificial,
intentionally or unintentionally,
like the bastardized food.
Yeah,
where you can eat it all you want.
It's it's worse than that. It's poisonous food.
Yeah.
It's food that is inherently toxic and harmful. Yeah. We talk a lot about Christian nationalism on this podcast, and it's a perfect example of what we're talking about here, in that it has worked over my lifetime. I've watched it actually emerge a self-consistent, at least internally, third story that it can sell to people that can scratch the itch of needing a third story. It can scratch the itch and give you that feeling of fulfillment, but only if you keep going back to the dispenser and getting more. So what do I mean by that? When I was growing up, it was all evolution boo, down with evolution, down with that sort of thing. And over my lifetime, they have crafted several different and competing pseudosciences to explain away what we can actually see in science and justify their initial beliefs. So justify their first story through a fake second story, so that they can create this kind of very artificial third story of here's how we're actually doing the science. And you have people like Ken Ham, I think is probably one of the most famous people in this field, but he's not alone. There are so many of these people that are really pretending to be scientists. They're pretending to be biologists. They're pretending to create this second story that, no, this is the rational, this is the scientific, this is what's going on. And here, let me put it together with our faith and craft this fake third middle way story that doesn't make sense, that doesn't actually work, that doesn't actually function in the real world. But you don't start realizing that until you start having some of the difficulties with trying to implement it in your life, right? You have this entire rise of the apologist, which apologetics is all about crafting a third story. We're going to take the stories of scripture and these pseudosciences that we've developed, or we're just going to distort science that is already out there and craft a story whereby we can justify all of our biases and self-delusion while maintaining the facade and belief that we are on the right path and building something together. But it chips away and it breaks on the edges. So you have to keep going back to these people to get more and more doses of the poison so you don't see what's going on around you. As somebody who really grew up in that world, you can see how they've crafted this entire industry meant to blind people. It's because they know that the meaning crisis is real. They know that this isolation is real. So how is it easiest to bring people together? Fear, of course. Fear, as H.P. Lovecraft reminds us, is the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind. I don't like quoting this man, but this is one of the few things he wasn't wrong about. Adolf Hitler said that fear is the master. Fear gathers people together quicker and more efficiently than love. And you see this. All of their messaging is about be afraid of these people, be afraid of those people, whether it's these books that are going into the schools. And by the way, depending on what year it is, it's going to be a different spate of books. Sometimes in the past, it was the Harry Potter books because magic is evil. Then it was the Twilight books because vampires are evil and werewolves are evil. And then it's, oh, wait, they're putting biographies of gay people and gay people are evil. Or they're just putting in stories that have minor diversity in it, like a character that happens to have 2 moms or 2 dads, right? The goalpost is always moving, but the fear is there. This is all able to maintain itself because it can build this self-consistent worldview around itself. And it really is duplicating the systems that need to be happening to get people out of the meaning crisis, but it's not something that's operating from within. It's something that you have to keep going back to the well and, oh no, I interacted with the world and the world doesn't make sense. I met a queer person and they weren't actually the devil. Explain to me again how they're the devil. Give me my pill. Give me my pill. Okay, I'm better now. I see how they're evil and I am the only good one. And you can stay in this world of self-delusion because it's able to scratch those itches, but it's not actually curing the ailment.
So then that brings me to, what tools would you recommend, practical, spiritual, and social practices that someone could use to help get past this obstacle?
I like daily affirmations, and I think the most empowering daily affirmation that we need in the world right now is for everyone to wake up, look in the mirror, and say to themselves, I'm an expert on nothing. And I think this is helpful for 2 reasons. One, I think we get ourselves in trouble when we think that we have an expertise that we don't have. And I think a lot of people think that they have an expertise in things that they really don't have. We see this all the time with people that think that they're more knowledgeable than the people who actually study health and medicine for a living because I've had a body for X number of years and I obviously know how to live in it. Sure, fine, but that's not universal, right? We don't understand the difference between an anecdote and a fact. But also, I think it's really important for us not to denigrate our abilities and our skills, but to try to keep ourselves ever in the state of beginner mind. I think the worst thing that we do is convince ourselves, oh, I know that. Because once you say, I know that, that means you don't need to learn anything else about it. I've been a writer most of my life, and I still love to read introduction to writing books. So you're writing your first novel. I love reading those books. And I always try to read them and try to think to myself, if I knew nothing, how would this book help me? And then, of course, knowing what I know, what would I not ever do from this book? What did I get wrong? But going at it from those 2 places that, again, first story kind of naivete of, yes, teach me, give me the ethics, the rights and the wrongs, the do's and the don'ts. And then through the scientific second story of, oh, wait, but I actually know that technique does not work for me or is played out because everybody decided to do that. And so that doesn't really work anymore, and bring that more analytical thing and then merge it into my own life, what remains into my own life story, my third story, to make it work. When you convince yourself that you are not an expert, you need to keep learning. And I really think that more than anything right now, that is really the change that needs to happen. Most of the arguments that I get into with people nowadays are, oh, you just don't understand. I understand this better than you. And you might. That's 100% possible. You might. But because they have accepted this, I'm an expert on whatever the topic is, they're not willing to listen. Now, that doesn't mean that we listen to all crackpot and crazy ideas, right? If somebody comes up to you tomorrow and says 2 + 2 is 22, maybe do a wellness check on that person. And by the way, a prominent figure has done that in the last couple years and led quite a few people down the primrose path. And I'm not going to even get into that. You don't listen to just every wild and woolly idea that comes your way. That's why you need to apply some discernment. But at the same time, know that there are fuzzy areas in all of our knowledge, and that our knowledge is not complete about anything. And if anybody tries to tell you that our knowledge is complete on a subject, know that they are lying to you and find out why. Like we are still learning about everything. We're still refining our ideas on everything. And that doesn't mean that we don't know anything. It's just all real knowledge is provisional. Like I think it's important for us to remember, we all knew that the world was flat and stationary and in the center of the universe, and that everything revolved around us. And even when we decided it's not flat, it's actually a circle, but we're still the center of the universe and everything revolves around us. We knew that. We knew that. We had math to show it. We had models to prove it. There was math to explain why Mercury went backwards every now and then. And then we were wrong. And then we realized, oh, Newton is right. And we accepted Newton for a really long time until Einstein came along and went, oh, but here's everything that Newton was wrong about. And to have the arrogance that at some point another Einstein or Newton or Galileo or whoever is not going to come along and take what we think is solid, firm ground to stand on and go, actually, and show us a better lens through which to see the universe is just hubris. And I think this is what is stopping us from having a lot of the conversations that we need to have. I think it's what's stopping us from having the honest conversations that we need to really start cleaning out the mess and the gunk that's in the noosphere, and to build the necessary to have the right relationship online. Because there's a lot of people online that I cannot have right relationship with because they're never going to have right relationship with me. And so I just don't engage.
Yeah. They're not even engaging in an honest way. And I think running along with that, another practice to really keep in hand is journaling. We need to be honest with ourselves that our memory is incredibly faulty, very problematic at best, very problematic. And it feeds into the first part where you're talking about with thinking that we know all, and we forget more than we will ever know.
Yeah. And
the journaling will help to record things in the moment. And that's the thing with the journaling tool as a toolkit that's so helpful with this is you get those snapshots of the moment. So then when you go back and look over it, you can be like, oh, that was crazy thinking. Why did I even think that? But then when you have that reaction, sit back and pull the journal out again and write explore why you had that reaction. Why did you think you were crazy and full of crackpot ideas? And for those that do journal, they find, and going back and revisiting their old writings, they can find, wow, oh, this, even in your own life, this permanent thinking, you could see those moments where you think, I've always thought this way. And in reality, a year or 2 years earlier, you thought maybe completely opposite.
I can say that I've been an anarchist for most of my life because that is a label that I have applied to myself. But I have gone through various different schools of thought on that. I have gone through various different ideas on how the methodology should work. And even though the label has been consistent for such a long time, the actual practice and the way those thoughts work in my head have changed. I have the great advantage of I've been podcasting for almost 20 years, which hurts me to say, but I started my first podcast in 2006 and I still have those old recordings, and I can go back and I can listen to them and cringe at young me very boldly and very proudly proclaiming things that even if I was right about, the way I said it was not the right way to say things. And then there are the things that I was definitely not right about.
Like that's the thing there. As the noosphere evolves and grows, the awareness, both the individual and community awareness of these ideas and these concepts evolve and grow. I can look back at younger me back in the 90s and go, wow, some of these things I thought was acceptable is horrible. They horrify me nowadays to think that I used to think that these things, like thinking like the comedy stylings in Porky's Revenge and stuff like that.
Not just that, just think of all the comedies that came out in the 90s.
A lot of comedies that came out in the 90s that we would look back and be like, that's so cringeworthy nowadays.
Nice comedies did not age well.
They did not age well.
And I'm sure the comedies we have today will not age well either.
Yeah, because that's the thing. The noosphere, these concepts, ideas evolve and grow. The idea of gender as a performance and stuff, like there was this huge push to change the narrative on that. because there was exploration into gender as a performative act that everybody participated in.
Yeah.
And then World War II happened and all the stuff just before it. Try not to say buzzwords that might get us in trouble with the robots in the sky. But then new stories rose up to try to cover up and try to push a more misogynistic narrative and pollute the noosphere with all these wrong ideas that we're starting to finally come back around to realize all the misogyny and everything involved.
I know I have been referring to the Marvel movies a lot lately. I'm going to do it again. If you really want to understand how the noosphere works, in the Captain America movies, he is given a list of songs to listen to get caught up. And what you might not know is, depending on where you were in the world, that playlist is different. They actually, in the movie, that gets changed in every region that movie came in. And there are places online where you can go and you can see, here's what the playlist looked like in the United States and in England and Germany and France. And when you start looking at the songs that are in there and listening to them, the zeitgeist, if you will, the meaning and purpose and all of the experiences that are conveyed by the music in that on that list, you can get a sense of at least what the creators of this project thought the spirit of the modern culture in each of those places was. And it's a really interesting thing to play with because it helps you start seeing these holons that we're talking about, these circles, because it's why I'm always clear on saying this is from an American perspective, because that's the only one I have. I've never lived outside the country that I was born in. And so I don't know what it's like to be even Canadian or British, even though our culture descends from British culture. Canada and the United States have a very strong shared history in a lot of ways because a lot of Americans fled north after the Revolutionary War and even more fled north after the Civil War. So it's like there's a lot of shared history there and a lot of divergent history there. And I don't even know what it's like to be Canadian, right? Because that's not an experience that I've had. And when you allow yourself to just take a minute or just go onto your favorite music app and load up the top 10 songs in your own country, and then look at the top 10 songs in other countries, right? It gives you a sense of how the world looks different where you are. And that is liberating. And it also humbling because we have this permanence bias and the survivorship bias that the way things are now is the way they've always been. And that what we have now is the best because it survived. And those are not necessarily the truth. Like I'll tell you right now, my favorite gospel to read is the Gospel of Truth. It is outside of the writings of Julian of Norwich, which is a whole side story, but of the early centuries of Christianity, it's the Gospel of Truth. I love the Gospel of Truth. We have, I think, 3 copies of it, 2 or 3 copies of it, maybe only one of them mostly intact. It didn't survive. And so most people will just take that as, well, it's meaningless. It's pointless. It fell on the dustbin of history. But we don't realize that it was illegal to own it, especially in Egypt. Like one of the main copies that we found was in Nakamati. And those were buried because edicts went down that if you owned any of these books, we're going to come for you. And so they took those books and they put them into jars and they buried them. Luckily for us, we found them and we have them again. So there's an artificiality to survivorship bias of what survived is not necessarily the best. It's what was selected for. And that in and of itself is also an empowering thought. We can bring back whatever we want, and we can find ways to get rid of whatever we want. They've done it in the past. If I talk about Bishop Nestor, you have probably no idea what I'm talking about. If you listen to this podcast, you might.
The Nestorians.
But he was such a prominent figure in early Christianity that there are tracts written from him from one side of the Mediterranean to the other because his theology and his movement was so strong and so powerful. And then they decided to kick him out. And they literally stripped him of all of his clothes and marched him off into the Arabian desert to die.
And I think the last tool I really want to touch on, I guess, briefly here before we wrap up, is the narrative exercises. I think the narrative exercise is so crucial for this process. Both the exercises where you're just being aware of what narratives are operating in your life, what narratives are being pushed onto you by other hierarchies and other holons that you may interact with. And then Also, along with that, sitting down and playing with, not only being aware, but playing with and creating new narratives in your life, like playing with those narratives, structuring new ones, going out and sharing them publicly. Because the whole thing is you want to see what the resonance is. Once you've created it, you need to then go put it out there and see how it resonates in the communities that you interact with. Don't be afraid to go back and make edits and rewrite the narrative further to fix parts, because better is better. Remembering that you're not going to make that ideal narrative. It may take your entire life. You may never get to the ideal narrative. But as long as the narrative that you have is better than the one you had before, you can move forward. And then maybe you'll make another one that's better than the one that you just made.
This is all an evolutionary process, and it's going to be incremental changes here, there, and yonder. And that hurts us. But also remember, incremental changes lead to mass extinctions. And I'm not saying that in a threatening kind of a way, but there is a critical point where there used to be these large amphibians. Imagine giant salamanders the size of alligators that were in our oceans. We don't even have saltwater amphibians anymore. Imagine these giant amphibians the size of alligators that ruled the oceans. And then they went away. Why did they go? Sharks. Certain kinds of sharks evolved. And so did mammals entering the water. Were they pushed out? Were they all eaten? Were they starved? We don't know exactly why they disappeared. All of a sudden, oh, look, they're the precursors of whales and seals in those waters where they are. And oh, we don't find their bones anymore. Small incremental changes changed everything. And we now live in a world where we don't have alligator-sized amphibians swimming in the ocean, but we used to. And that's the thing, is all of this is reaching towards a critical point. So while it can be frustrating to be working on small incremental change, I know that can be frustrating when we are like, no, we need big, grand changes. You got to build, because eventually it's going to get to the top of the hill and it's going to roll down like a snowball, getting bigger and bigger, taking out everything in its path. Like, change is slow until it isn't. And I think that's a good way to end the series. So I hope you've enjoyed everything that we've talked about. I hope we've introduced you maybe to some new ideas. If you want to know more, you can always go to fractalkinship.com, which is a new website we're putting up to dig into all of this a lot deeper. Or if you've missed any of the episodes in this series, we did 5 of them, go check them out and dig in a little bit deeper. And yeah, I think that this is, at least for me, like seeing all of this kind of fit together, because I had always seen all of these discussed separately. And something happened to me where it all clicked into place and all of the parts just started functioning and moving together, and in ways that we haven't even got into yet, about how the ideas in Druidry have really fed into this in CreationSpirituality and how that all fits into this. And it's turtles all the way down. I guess I should say it's Holons all the way down.
Holons all the way down.
But I hope that you're as excited about this path forward as I am. Yes, we're going to continue giving you the stuff that you're used to on here. It's not always going to be a week like this. Like I said, next week, we're going into a deep dive on the divine feminine. So look forward to that. But yeah, I would love to know what you think about this and all of the topics we discussed this week. You can let us know in the comments. If you're listening to us on YouTube, Spotify, or CreationsPaths.com, you can leave a comment right there. If you're listening to us anywhere else, even if they say you can leave a comment, they don't notify us, so we won't know. But you can leave a comment there anyway, because engagement is magic. And then head over to CreationsPaths.com, click on chat, and you can leave a message there, and we will see it, and we will be able to get back to you. While you're there, if you happen to have a few dollars, you can pass our way. We offer monthly and annual memberships. You can also support us on Patreon and Ko-fi. I am CE Dorset on both, and you can support us using the Cash App hashtag CreationsPaths. Thank you to everybody who does that. We are ever so grateful. Thank you so much. You all really do help us keep the lights on, keep a roof over our head, and food on our table. If we've ever said anything that's helped you out, please share it with others. That helps us out more than you know. And as we're heading out today, I can't think of anyone more fitting than my beloved Saint Julian of Norwich. Blessed Julian, help us learn to pray with you as Christ taught you to pray. All things shall be peace. All things shall be well. All things shall, that this is the way it is behooved to be now, that all shall be peace. All shall be peace. And help us to experience that peace within ourselves and to continue the work until the day when we can look out around us and say, all is peace. Amen.
Amen.